Thank you very much for all your hard work, Dr. Bertha. Boss. Good afternoon. My name is James Turner. I'm one of the ST6s at Hull in East Yorkshire at the moment, and I'm going to be trying to raise you all from the postprandial days to get us into this afternoon session, for which we've got some really interesting talks. So just to introduce the first session, I'd like to invite Sarah Winfield, who is one of the consultant obstetricians at Leeds General Infirmary. She's got an interest in internal medicine. She runs the tertiary care, renal and cardiac service. I think she's also the only obstetrician here as well, so be nice, but also be careful, because she's got a degree in physiology, according to her bio as well. So
that's not a lie, that's actually...
Yeah, so we won't be able to fox her with any questions, or we normally do for the surgeons. With her today on stage, working with her on this project, is Deborah Horner, who's one of the consultants at Bradford, and I'm very much looking forward to this talk. So over to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Can everybody hear? We've not got a roving mic, but we have got two mics. So I'd like to thank the Society for inviting me and Debbie to come and talk. And I would say that I'm the only obstetrician in the room, but there's a very good reason for that. My first experience with anaesthetics was when I was a medical student at North Tees. I'm a Newcastle graduate, and the anaesthetist and the gynaecologist said, "Would you like to intubate this patient?" And I went, "Yeah, dead keen." And I broke all of the patient's teeth. So I went down to the other end of that body and I stayed there for the next 20 odd years. So I'm an obstetrician, and we work in a very busy centre. There's a lot of my Leeds colleagues here. Hello, and thank you to all of you, because I couldn't do my job as a maternal medicine obstetrician, high-risk obstetrics and everything we bring through Leeds without any of you guys. So this is a real public thank you to you guys. You know who you are. Debbie is my colleague from the Maternity Clinical Network, and I'm here today with my maternity network hat on. I'm the clinical lead for Yorkshire Maternity Network. I've been that for the last 6 years. The network has several work streams, and maternal enhanced and critical care is one of them. We look at stillbirth, we look at perinatal mental health and other things, but this is a really important one that we've been doing certainly for the last few years. Debbie is the chair of the group, and we're going to tell you about our work so that you know what's going on in the region, and hopefully you'll have questions and hopefully you'll understand a bit more about where we are. So our experience in Yorkshire and Humber, why did we start looking at it, maternal enhanced and critical care? What did we need to consider when we were looking at a region of 13 very, very different maternity units? I'm just watching this, but I'm afraid I'm going to just fall off, so I'll do somebody just pick me up. What steps did we take? What did we produce at the end of it all? And where are we now? And how we are now moving this forward? So this is a document that has been in well, it's been in circulation since July 2011. And whenever people say, "Oh, that critical care document with the woman and the orange and the yellow and the green," I can't remember the long title, but everybody knows what this is. Certainly in obstetrics and obstetric anaesthesia. And this document acknowledges that childbirth is a major life event for everyone that has a baby, and the few women that become ill in this time need to be able to reliably have the same standard of care delivered by professionals with the same level of competencies, whether or not they're provided in a maternity or a general critical care setting. You'll also be familiar with this document, Comprehensive Critical Care Without Walls. That acknowledges that critical care is not something that's just delivered within the four walls of a unit. That people get sick in the hospital, not just pregnant women, but other people get sick in the hospital. They need critical care services to be mobile, responsive, and highly trained individuals to be delivering them. The Confidential Inquiry into Maternal Deaths is a document in obstetrics that's been in evidence since the 40s, and it looks at why women die. It's a triennial report produced every 3 years, and it looks at the major causes of maternal death. And it's one of the first documents that I ever read as an SHO in Obs and Gynae. It used to be called Why Mothers Die, or CMACE, and there's lots of different sort of acronyms for it, but it's now Mothers and Babies Reducing Risk Through Audits and Confidential Inquiries. Embrace, not Embrace, which there's lots of charities and organisations called Embrace, but this is Embrace. This is readily available on the internet, readily available presentations on the Embrace website. You can see that mortality statistics haven't really changed that much in their whole numbers for many, many years. We've seen changes in trends between deaths directly attributable to pregnancy. We've also seen changes in the way we deal with things like postpartum hemorrhage, preeclampsia, etc. And we're getting better at these things. But there's an increasing number of women now that come to us and they become sick when they're pregnant, or very frequently at Leeds we see women that are already sick, they get pregnant and we look after them. We've got also rising morbidity. There's women that thankfully don't die, but they are really sick. I was on call last weekend and the week before, and we have evidence of that. We have patients that have got cardiac problems. They don't just necessarily present at Leeds, pneumonia, etc. They present in other centres, but these women present and they're sick and they're pregnant or they're postnatal. And it's really interesting because pregnancy, sometimes if you're not an obstetrician or an anaesthetist, people are blinded. They go pregnant, don't want to know, but actually they might not necessarily need us as obstetricians. They need other people to pick up the pieces, and not necessarily the baby's not the main concern, it's mum's health, because without mum's health there is no baby. And also you have heard of the UCOS, the UK Obstetric Surveillance System. They pick up cases that have got women that have nearly died. They look at cases like amniotic fluid embolism, sepsis, etc. And we have a real problem with sepsis still. Certainly not just in the UK, this is USA data, increasing trend in sepsis, comorbidity and delays in management. People are afraid, people that aren't us, we know about this, we're afraid to give women antibiotics when they come in with an infection. Oh, I don't want to harm the baby, I don't want to give this woman drugs because she's pregnant. And that's a real problem. Some of you will recognise this. The Morecambe Bay, you'll have seen it in the press, the Morecambe Bay inquiry into the mums and babies that died in that trust, the midwives that call themselves the Band of Musketeers, the closed loops, the people that weren't collaborating, that they weren't dysfunctional teams, people weren't talking to each other, consultants were taking a step back, and there was lots of examples in that of substandard care in clinical practices. So all of this is not joyous and doesn't sort of make us feel warm and glowy inside, other than perhaps terrible indigestion, but this is really bad, sad stuff, and we need to do better. So that's what we're trying to do. So following the equity of care document, the question was, do we provide equity of care in this country, critical care for mums? And an audit was sent out, a survey was sent to UK Anaesthetic Leeds in 2014. And there was a 71% response rate, which actually is pretty good when you consider some surveys it is pretty poor response. And 50% of maternal critical care units, so those that call themselves that, have no critical care training. It's quite interesting. Less than 7% assessed critical care competencies for midwives, and only 3% provided any training for midwives that were involved in transferring sick women. And only 6% of units have service level agreements for maternal critical care activity. So staffing is key. Staffing at maternity there's such a diverse number and makeup of staff. We all know that. I wouldn't dream of setting foot on the delivery suite and not having a really close working relationship with the anaesthetist, with the Band 7 and with the junior staffing of the midwives. So we have a lot of staff to consider when we're thinking of changing the way we deliver a service. Got to look at how they're trained and who is the first responder when a patient is sick. So you'll recognise this. We were under the spotlight 6-7 years ago, One Born Every Minute. I don't know if any of you watched it, but it's quite interesting. Quite interesting editing, let's just say. And everywhere you went, you couldn't go to the fridge without having to get a piece of toast without the camera tilting in, and you wondered if that would end up on national TV. But anyway, obstetricians are made up of ST1 to ST3 obstetricians, and they're on the wards out of hours. So they're on the wards when I'm as a consultant at home. That's rarer for all of us these days. They're usually the first point of call for escalation in the LSAW. And then you've got foundation training doctors that come to obstetrics, and they're brand new, and we train them up, and we hopefully build up their confidence and give them some skills. And they're trained initially in the early recognition of critical illness, but that's kind of cursory, it's not continued. And they come to obstetrics, and then they're involved in going to maternity assessment, doing speculums and all of that business, and so they don't do any more of that. Then you have sub-spec trainees in obstetrics, and quite a few of these will be in things like perinatal medicine, fetal medicine, urogynae, etc. So they've got not a lot of input or training in critical care. And ideally it would be lovely to have a lead maternal critical care obstetrician on the team. There is the dream. Midwifery staff, that's Linda Abbott and Gail Wright. You recognise Linda Abbott because she was the person in One Born that kept going to the wrong room with her can of fizzy pop. And she's opened garden parties and all sorts of stuff on the back of this. So she has, and she's been accosted in the frozen section at Isla Asda as well. So she's got her fame's worth out of One Born. So Linda and Gail, experienced midwives. So midwifery, staffing on delivery suites typically is direct entry midwives. They're not nurse trained, they go straight to university and do midwifery. They don't do any nurse training beforehand, and that actually makes a very big difference. Midwives, excuse me, frequently are quite short staffed. Some of them have an extended role in management, etc., that doesn't involve any of this. And maternal critical care training needs for midwives are not very clearly defined. And a regional survey has backed up this deficit, and there are very few established courses and training opportunities for midwives, and quite frequently they say, well, I can't get the time off. I can't get the time off to come to these things. So we've got a real problem. Anaesthesia and maternal critical care, you guys, you see you've got a cursory little blurry figure at the back. And actually, you guys at Leeds, Jimmy's and at LGI, make the world go round for us obstetricians. We couldn't do our jobs without you, so it's a bit unfair that you've got a blurry little figure in the back. I don't even know who that is. It's not you, Sarah Monty, is it? You're at the front of the other? No, okay. So, essentially, you guys have an increasing theatre workload, especially out of hours, we know that. The anaesthetic registrar is the key responder, but isn't always available. You guys get busy with epidurals, etc., other things. You might be in theatre sorting out a woman anaesthetic for a third-degree tear, that's another story, and you might just be busy when somebody's sick that comes in. There's also an impact on obstetric and anaesthetic intensivist training, and the consultant intensivist that you get might not necessarily have any obstetric training. They may be a respiratory physician, but you've also got ICU and bed pressures, and we know about that, and you definitely know about that. So what we did to get things off the ground with the network is we've made it a priority, and it has been. There was a stakeholder event, and then we did trust engagement visits, and I literally got into my car and I drove around all the units in the region. Now, I'm a Geordie, so I came down to Leeds 7 years ago. I was a consultant in Teesside before I came here, and it took half of my day to get to places because I didn't know where I was going, and my sat nav was no help. Then we did a benchmarking exercise. What kind of service do you provide? So I went in with one of my network team and I asked people what they did. And we had varied responses, but people were very, very receptive and gave us the information that they had. And then we established a task and finish group and the MEAC workshop in 2017. Establishing the task and finish group, we had to be really clear about what we wanted to get out of it, because people's time's precious and you don't want a meeting for the sake of a meeting. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to benchmark, we wanted to produce guidance and recommendations, launch those documents within the region to share, and share cases and good practice. We wanted to have a facilitator and supportive role for each trust to develop those plans, and we also wanted to improve resources for patient feedback and collect and discuss the use of data, which Debbie will talk about shortly. We also wanted to reduce the level of avoided maternal morbidity in cases, see evidence of improved management and experience, and focus on training. So the information we got from the benchmarking was quite interesting. All trusts engaged, which was great, fantastic. They all felt they were providing a safe service, but everybody had acknowledged that we needed to get it better, to improve things. All trusts had good relationships with critical care, including outreach, and all trusts would welcome support regionally. Particularly around standardisation of training competencies and maintaining them. Because it's quite difficult in small units, the throughput of sick patients that come through and present is going to make it quite difficult for people to keep going with the competencies once they're trained. All trusts voiced concerns in relation to meeting the recommendations, and particularly what's around the scope of midwifery, but they supported the idea of them. And we have to be flexible with recommendations because every trust and every unit is different. You'll have a big beast like Leeds, and then you'll have a slightly smaller unit, say like Airedale, it's got fewer deliveries, but nevertheless, sick people don't really care where they present, and we've all got to be able to deal with them. At the same time we were trying to produce our documents, we worked quite closely with Audrey Quinn and the national team, and this guy came out here, the critically ill women in childbirth enhancing maternal care. And these are the documents that we produced. And what I'm going to do now is hand over to Debbie. She's going to flesh that out.
So, quick question, because it'd be interesting to see whether anything's changed since that survey of training and what people provide. How many units of the units that you work in have patients that have arterial line and central lines on their unit? Okay, and keep your hands up. I'm very positive.
Being well looked after arterial lines, or just arterial lines?
That's the next bit of the question. How many of those people have got specific training and maintenance of competencies for the midwives that are looking after those patients to look after those lines? Okay, So that probably fits with what we saw in that national document from, was it 2011?
Yeah.
So we've not moved on a huge amount in that time. But what I'm going to do is talk about enhanced care. So enhanced care is something that's come out of the national document that Sarah was talking about. If you look at these definitions of what enhanced care is, those of you who've got a critical care interest will see that enhanced maternity care definition, which is patients at risk of their condition deteriorating or those recently relocated from higher levels of care, that is the level 1 intensive care society definition. But if you look at the national document and enhanced care, it says that enhanced care is what the competencies say it is, or is defined by the competencies in that document. And all of the competencies related to enhanced care are around looking after arterial lines and central lines, so not level 1. So we've got this bit of a disconnect between what we're trying to deal with. We know we've got increasing numbers of sick women. We know that we've got an issue with the number of patients we have coming through with arterial lines and central lines and who's going to look after them. We know that we've got critical care units which are often in a separate bit of the hospital. They might not even be in the same building, that might need a transfer in an ambulance to get to, and you've also got critical care training which is moving away from obstetrics. And having taught on the Faculty of ICM teaching in London the other day, there's an increasing number of people who had done absolutely no obstetrics who are on single stream ICM. So those are the consultants of the future. So we've got a big issue that we need to sort out, and this enhanced care national document was the first step in the direction of getting this sorted. But we realised quite quickly as a region that there are other minutiae bits of it that we needed to sort out to make it workable for every unit in the region. So what is enhanced care? It's not really level 2, it's sort of level 1 plus care. So it starts at the point, so anyone who has an HDU chart, it probably starts at the point that you think, a bit worried about that patient, I'm going to put them on an HDU chart. That's probably where it starts. But where does it finish? And actually, I think what we need to be looking at is a flexible finish point. So we need to look at what the size of your unit is, how many deliveries you have, how many sick women you have coming through, and do you have enough women who are needing those kind of higher level interventions for your midwives to be able to maintain their competency. So different units are different, and we can't, I don't think, and certainly this has been borne out in the meetings that we've had to talk about this, there isn't a one-size-fits-all for every unit. So the bigger units, so for example certainly Leeds and Bradford and Sheffield, are planning to keep women who have arterial lines and central lines on their units, and they're going to train their midwives to have competency to look after those lines. Smaller units, so for example Harrogate, have been very involved in putting all of this together. They've said, hang on, we only have maybe one of these every month, if that are going to need the lines. We can't possibly maintain competency for our midwives. The midwives actually don't really want to have those competencies. We're going to move those patients earlier to critical care, and we're going to look at upskilling our critical care staff so they've got more obstetric competency. And the other thing is, with some of the smaller units in our region, they are often co-located or quite close to the critical care units, so that makes it easier in terms of planning delivery for those patients. So, in terms of the enhanced care that we're talking about, in our regional document guidelines that we produced, we've outlined what we think that is and what the competencies are. So there's something around the sort of knowledge of maternal critical illness, the physiology and pharmacology, recognising when escalation to critical care is required, and then there's different skills that are in there. And as an individual unit, each unit needs to decide what it is, which skills they want their enhanced care midwives to have, and then make sure that they are transferring appropriately against their own guidelines. So, we've got a steering group. So we started off with a task and finish group. We became a steering group once we produced the regional documents. It's multidisciplinary, there's critical care, midwifery, obstetrics, there's NHS England, people, there's clinical educators. So it's quite a big group, but it's pretty functional. And what we are aiming to do is to reduce variation in MEAC, not making every unit the same, as I've said, but reduce the variation in what we're doing so that everyone is actually complying to their own guidelines, which are based on our enhanced care guidelines. We are looking at training so that we can train our staff appropriately for whatever it is you're asking them to deliver in your unit. And we're also then hoping that that will then reflect better outcomes for women and their babies. So in terms of the priorities, these are very similar to what Sarah was talking about. I'm going to talk a bit about the training recommendations. We've got to the point where we have identified what we think we should have in our training. There's a standard training package, which I'll talk about in a minute, and then the enhanced competency training. One of the things that's been pointed out by lots of the units is the midwives do move around quite a lot, and actually it would be really useful to have an enhanced competency passport. So when a midwife moves to another unit, you know what skills they've got in enhanced care, and then you can adapt what it is you want to teach them. If there's anything extra in your unit, you know exactly what they are able to provide. Critical care training, we've put that out with the scope of MEAC, but at the same time as what we're doing, Manchester is looking at obstetric competencies for critical care nurses. So watch this space, because they're likely to be publishing those in the next year. The draft version has been circulated. So what training are we going to be suggesting? So it's gone a bit fuzzy on the slide, but Maternal Aims is a course that was put together by Manchester. It's run by their skills unit, which is a charity. The reason we picked this is that it follows a kind of ABC assessment, as a lot of the kind of anaesthetic emergency training models are. It is basically around identifying initial management and escalation of sick patients. So this is for all midwives. In the first instance, I think we're certainly going to be training our delivery suite midwives, but actually it's probably just as relevant for midwives in the community, midwives on the ward, because anyone could come into touch with a patient who has deteriorated or is deteriorating. The good thing about this course is it's free, so you just need to have your agreement with the Manchester Skills unit that you're going to abide by their rules. There's a manual. That's the only bit that does have a cost, but it's about £4.50, I think, for manual, so it's a very small cost. The course runs over a day. The financial outlay comes in terms of having your faculty available. We are going to be setting up an AIMS hub in Yorkshire and Humber, because we need to be starting to train up the midwives to teach on these courses as well. So there will be a Yorkshire AIMS hub where we'll run a trainer-trainer course for AIMS, and also be able to help set up courses in other units and quality assure for the region, because Manchester have already said that they would get overwhelmed quite quickly if everybody in Yorkshire starts doing it. But they're very supportive of that, and they have got a model around Chester which is doing something similar. So, enhanced care. Again, each unit needs to decide how they want to approach this. I think the most likely, or the thing that I think is going to work best, is to have a dedicated enhanced care midwife on every shift. Now that's not saying you need to add additional midwifery staff, you just need to have one slot on your rota that's allocated to the enhanced care midwife. And this kind of happens in most cases anyway, because you'll know, you can see the band 7s when they're allocating the staff, they go, oh, so-and-so's got an interest in looking after sick women, they've done it before. This is just about giving them a title and also the training to go with that. And the course that we're going to be recommending for that is the Prompt Critically Ill Pregnant Patient course. Now the reason we picked this is that most of the units in the region have already engaged with Prompt or are in the process of engaging with Prompt, and this is free as part of the Prompt package. So again, there's no financial outlay, it just needs to be delivered as a course. Half-day course, there's some lectures around recognition of sick patients, but with slightly more complexity than the AIMS course. Some of the more complex diagnoses are discussed, and then also the recognition about when that patient needs to go to critical care. And then in terms of the small group sessions, as a unit you decide which things you want to pick, but all of the information and photos, everything is within the Prompt folder, or the dongle that you get given when you go and attend the Prompt training in London. So the next thing we want to do is, right, we've decided what we want to do in our units, we've trained our staff, what next? So we already know that nobody's really collecting any data about outcomes specifically for sick women who are looked after on delivery suite. And we don't actually know whether it's better for women to deliver on delivery suite or on critical care. I mean, it sort of makes sense that if your critical care is a million miles from obstetrics, that's not going to be brilliant if they suddenly have a baby in the middle of the night. But we don't actually know, we don't collect any of this data. So we really need to look at that. And the NNPA did a sprint audit looking at maternal admission to critical care, which was published in November. And they said the variation in the admission rates across the country were really marked, and it just reflected the fact that everybody's doing something different and we don't really know what anyone's doing, and they're really keen that we get on and work out what everyone's doing, standardise it where we can and collect outcome data. So the data set. Originally, when we were looking at this, I thought, okay, this is fine, we'll collect a bit of data. We can do it with the LMS. That's, you know, fine. We'll base it on what's in the national document. We might collect a little bit of outcome data in terms of the things that ICNARC collect. But I'm just going to go and ask the NNPA, because they've done that sprint audit. You know, is anyone else doing this? They want to reinvent the wheel. Anyway, that generated a whole load of national interest. So suddenly the spotlight was on Yorkshire and Humber. So we really need to get this right. So they're all very interested, and that's great because it does reflect that they were all looking for someone to actually run with this, sort out this kind of disconnect between the national document and what everyone's doing in terms of what, you know, we're providing on different units. So we are going to be putting together a pilot, probably for a national data collection tool in the longer term. We've got Improvement Academy involvement from Bradford. The NNPA are also likely to be a partner in this. We're just sorting that out. And also the OAA are very interested. So what would be amazing in the longer term is once we get this data set up and we access data from the maternity data set, we minimise what we need to collect locally, because lots of it's in national databases anyway, and then we start looking at risk prediction and where should we be looking after these women once we've got the data. So next steps, finalise the data set. We are then going to be seeing whether we can get some of the national data out from the outset so that we don't put a whole load of work onto midwives and other units to collect data. I would imagine that what this is probably going to look like is having, similar to when the preeclampsia stuff was rolled out, so there'll be a midwife within each trust who will be responsible for the data collection. There's probably only 1 or 2 women a day maximum, probably less than that in most units, who are going to fall into this enhanced care group. So it's not a huge burden for each individual unit. There'll be a coordinating midwife for the region who will then be the go-to person for those midwives to contact if there are any issues. And then there will be various yet to be confirmed national groups involved, with me involved as the kind of regional person who's overseeing what's happening from our point of view. I said here to pilot the data in April and May. That's probably going to be slightly delayed just because of all the national stuff that's going on, and national things work slower, it turns out, from Yorkshire and Humber. We're setting up the Maternal Aims Regional Hub, so that should be coming soon. There are units in the region who've already set up maternal aims, so I think Corderdale has, and we have, and other places are very interested in doing that and on the treadmill towards getting there. And our next thing is to put together a regional network event, which is going to be in September this year, where we're going to launch what we've done. So we should hopefully have the data set sorted by then, and we'll also go through in a bit more detail what the training is going to comprise and have a kind of forum for any questions that people have about specific issues with their units. So that's all from me. I'm just going to hand back over to Sarah to sum up.
I'll allow the last slide, so that's nice. Okay. So, from the beginning, we've come a really long way, and we're understanding that we're presenting all this, but we have come a long way. Time flies, but a lot of good progress has been made, and people are now talking, we're working on the data side of things, and it's really important, so it feels good. I put final thoughts in our following good example. I think the right people. We work with Audrey, Peter Watkinson, and we've made contact with Rivers Leading the Way. I had a podium spot at the ICS SOA meeting in December. It was quite funny because I stood up and presented this. And I was expecting there to be about 3 people there, because in the auditorium next door, it was Chris and Zan van Tulliken from Operation Ouch, and everybody stampeded to them. So, but I still had a room full of people, so people are interested. We're happy to share what we produce with others. In fact, we have shared these documents with people nationally that have wanted to have them, and we're proud of them. Training and maintaining competencies is really, really important. And that's to labour point. Labour's not going to be for but training and maintaining competencies is really important, because patients do get sick in areas. Small units are not just the big places like Leeds and where we have readily available expertise. And finally, this sounds obvious, but this should be a nice experience for women to have a baby, and more frequently, and so frequently we see people coming through, as we've seen from the previous lectures this morning, that it's not a good experience for some women, and women don't choose when they get sick by and large. They get sick and we pick up the pieces. So collecting feedback and acting is really, really important. This is my final slide. Can anybody tell me why I've put all these women on this slide? Don't say it's bad TV, but probably is some of it. But does anybody know what these women have got in common? Each one of these women during pregnancy has required some form of critical or enhanced care input. Darcy Russell, Paloma Faith, Sophie Ellis-Fester, fulminating preeclampsia. Amanda Holden, massive bleeding placenta previa. Kim Kardashian, placenta previa. Rachel Evans, preeclampsia. Tori Spelling previa, and Lily Allen nearly died. She had a mid-trimester loss, was fulminating sepsis, was really, really sick. So all of these women, some of them have actually taken it upon themselves to go public and say, this is what's happened to me, and this is why the NHS is important, and this is why it's important that we get looking after sick women right. So thank you very much, everybody, for your attention, and we'll take some questions if you have any.
Thank you very much, guys. Have we got any questions from the floor? Andrew.
Debbie, I've got a question. Are there any challenges of running both AIMS and prompt course in your hospital? Not only releasing the faculty, but you have to train, for example, in our unit, in Hull, there are about 420 midwives, including the community. So it's not only the faculty, I'm just wondering, releasing all those midwives.
Yes, is the answer. It is. I didn't mention that, but obviously releasing the midwifery staff is. One of the things that we found as an issue, certainly with the AIMS training, it's the same with prompt actually, is that you're trying to release quite a lot of your clinical staff in one go, and often it's the midwifery staff that find it most difficult to attend prompt or AIMS. What I would quite like to do is, once more units have got established, is to share slots on different courses so that actually you don't have to release all of your staff in one go. So perhaps you'll have a handful from your unit, but you'll fill the other slots that you can't fill with staff from another unit, which will spread the load over the whole year. Because I think that is something that is going to be an issue. Having said that, with the AIMS training, we haven't set a kind of deadline on how often that has to be repeated, but it's not an annual thing, certainly. I think maximum would be once every 3 to 4 years. So it's not everyone going through like prompt, so it should be less of a problem than prompt if you're putting all the midwives through that.
So it's once in every 3 to 4 years, you mean to say, the AIMS?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much for the talk. It was really interesting. One question I have is, given that there seems to be such an overwhelming response nationally about what you describe as a disconnect, have the midwifery courses, the undergraduate courses, for example, paid attention, or have they sort of thought perhaps they need to rectify their curriculum a little bit?
It's coming. So I think historically it's been all about normal, and I think the first move to not calling birth normal, so that 50% or however many percentage of women who didn't achieve normal felt like failures, that was the first kind of step towards actually acknowledging the fact that there's a lot of women who don't manage that kind of traditional normal delivery. And the college is looking at changing its curriculum so that some of this will start to feed into the undergraduate curriculum as well. The other problem we've got, of course, is now we've got direct entry midwifery training. We've got we're losing that kind of nursing background that we've got in some of the older midwives that we have on the unit. So it's a kind of double whammy of them needing to do something to sort out the training programme, but that is coming.
Any other questions?
Just one last question, maybe. You know the prompt SEP course, the half-day program?
Yes.
That sounds a stupid question, but does it tick box the competency for the midwives for the enhanced critical care?
Yes, it does. Because you can, prompt has got lots of information in it. You pick out the things that you want to provide. The one thing I didn't mention actually is that's the initial training. The other thing is about maintenance of competency. So although that will give them initial kind of this is what not, like if say you want to do lines, of course, if you do want to do something like lines, these are the lines, this is how they work, these are the issues. Clearly that's not enough to kind of make them competent to then go out the next day and look after an arterial line or central line on the unit. So the other thing that we are going to be suggesting, and again it depends on what you decide to provide on your unit, is a period of time with critical care and critical care outreach. So for those units that do want to look after really sick women, perhaps we've suggested maybe 3 days on critical care. Remember, this is a small group of midwives though. This is, I think in James Cook they've got 5.4 whole-time equivalents trained in enhanced care. So it's a small group of midwives, and that's enough to fill one slot on your rotas. And then in terms of maintaining competency, a day a year, half a day going through your line competencies and other competencies with the critical care educators on critical care, and possibly half a day with critical care outreach.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.